Let us go to the first puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: rook takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop to d4, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to e3, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to d8. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes rook, check. King to g2. Rook to b8. Another one. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is: king to c5. Bishop to f1. b4. c4. b3. King to c3. b2. Another puzzle. The threats are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is: b6. Rook to a6. King to c5. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. Checks in this position are: knight to g3, check. The best move in puzzle position is: knight to g3, check. King to h2. Knight takes rook, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Another puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: bishop takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes rook, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop to d7, check. Queen to d7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to g4, check. Solution to the puzzle is: bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes rook. Pawn takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: there are no threats in this position. Checks in this position are: rook to h8, check. Solution to the puzzle is: d5. Rook takes pawn, check. King to d4. Rook to a6. d6. Next puzzle. Threats in this position are: queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Checks in this position are: queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to e4. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes queen. Bishop to g5, check. Rook to d2. Let us go to the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: pawn takes knight. Queen to g3, check. King to f8. Queen to e5. Rook to e8. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is: rook to h4. Queen to d1. Queen to g5. Queen to g1, check. King to g3. Rook to d1. Queen to h6. Rook to d3, check. Rook to f3. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: there are no threats in this position. Checks in puzzle position are: rook to g1, check. Solution to the puzzle is: bishop to e8. f6. Bishop takes knight. f7. Rook to d8. Rook to g1. Knight to f8. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to g8, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook to g8, check. Answer to this puzzle is: rook to g7. Rook to e1, check. King to h2. Queen to e8. Rook to g8, check. King to e7. Rook takes queen, check. Next, here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using: bishop to c4. Rook to c2. King to c5. Rook to h2. d3. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is: g5. Queen to f4. Pawn takes bishop. Bishop to g4. Queen to d2. Next puzzle, puzzle position vulnerabilities are. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes knight check. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Checks in this position are. Queen takes knight check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. f4. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Another puzzle. The threats are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is. Bishop to e3. Bishop takes bishop, check. King to h1. Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes knight. Rook to f8, check. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen, checkmate. Another puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is. King to f6. King to e4. b5. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using g4, d4, h5, d3, king to e3. Next, the threats are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is. King to f5. Queen to h1. Queen to b8, check. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Queen takes knight. The checks are. Knight to d6, check. Solution to the puzzle is. Knight takes knight. Bishop to h6. Knight to d5. Next, threats in this position are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using. King to a2. King to d2. b4. f4. b3. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen to h7, check. The answer is. Rook takes knight. Rook to e8. Rook to g4. Another one. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes knight. Checks in this position are. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is. Rook takes knight. Bishop takes rook. Bishop to d4. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are. Rook takes rook. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. e3, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. e3, check. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn, check. King to d3. Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes rook. e2. Rook takes rook. Promotes to queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are. There are no threats in this position. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to f6, check. Rook to e3, check. Promotes to queen, check. Promotes to rook, check. The answer is. Rook to e1. King takes pawn. Promotes to queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are. Queen takes bishop. Bishop takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to f3, check. Solution to the puzzle is. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Bishop takes knight. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.